John woke up and wiggled his way slowly to the edge of his bed. He grabbed his walking crutches nearby and positioned his leg so that it wouldn't dangle or touch the ground as he held it up and lifted himself up with his walking crutches. He then prepared for the day. He was very excited for today because it was a day that he was going to meet some preachers and hear from them about their religion and also put them in their place with the things they were saying. If you're someone that likes real stories of courage, miracles, and quiet, unwavering faith, then you're in the right place because that's all I do here. I tell stories that remind us that God is still in the details of our lives. So if that's of interest to you, the next time you go grocery shopping, please pick up the like button and take them shopping with you, get all your groceries, and make sure they get all their groceries, and then pay for their groceries as well as yours. And if you have a miracle or a tender mercy that you know of or that you've been a part of in your life, please fill out the form in the comments section below. We'd love to hear it and feature it on our channel. All right, let's get into today's story. On August 15th, 1778, John was born to parents Joshua and Thankful. And his childhood was pretty normal for the time period, much like other children born in his time period and his age. But when he started to enter into young adulthood and adulthood, things started to get really rocky. When John was 22, he married Tabitha Bentley. About a year later, shortly after their marriage, she unfortunately died in childbirth. And a little bit later, he married his second wife, Lydia Stewart. Together, they raised many kids, and they lived together for 17 years before she unfortunately died as well. Shortly after that, John married Eliza Bentwick. Now, at one point in 1808, he came home to find two of his kids screaming in pain on the ground. Looking around, he saw that nearby there was a dog, and he also saw that his kids were bleeding. They had been bitten by this dog. John went over, and before he got to the dog, he took a closer look because his senses were telling him that something was off. When he looked at the dog, he saw that its hackles were raised and it was looking mad and it had slobber drooling out of its mouth. John knew instantly that this dog was what the term referred to back then had gone mad. Knowing what that meant, John tried to retain the dog and put it into an enclosure, and as he did so, he felt something on his leg, a sharp pain, and he looked down and saw that the dog had bit him. So he quickly put the dog into the enclosure so that it couldn't bite anyone else, and then he tended to his wound, knowing that rabies would kill you if it was not taken care of. He promptly got out some sheep shears and began to get rid of the infected part of his leg. Later, he packed it with salt so that it would clean it. A little while later, John was fully healed, and he was able to procure some antibiotics and medicines for his children so that they also were healed. This is just one of the many trials that John went through in his life, and from it we can see a little bit of his character. He was very brave, outgoing, courageous, and he wasn't afraid to do things to be successful. John's trials happened throughout his whole life, and his character is what really pulled him through. As John went on in life, because of his character, he became known as somebody that would take 100% responsibility with whatever he did. He would go after his goals, and he became very prosperous in terms of wealth and influence in the community. He lived in New York at this time, and he was known as someone that everyone looked up to. They really liked John. As wonderful as his character was, that didn't stop him from having more trials. And unfortunately, at the time of his early 50s, he would contract an unknown disease in his leg that would render him basically useless for his physical things that he's been doing his whole life. At the age of 13, John was put in charge of his father's farm because his father passed away. So he was in charge of doing all of the farm work, keeping up the books, and the finances. From then on, he worked with his hands and used his legs to get around to do his work. And so at this time of this disease being contracted, it was devastating for John. The disease was so bad in his leg that black spots started to cover his whole leg, from his thigh down to his feet, just on one leg though. And people would look at it and they would say that they could see the tendons poking through the muscles. It hurt so bad that John had to keep his leg at a right angle to his body, and he couldn't even let the infected leg dangle because it would hurt so bad. And John, being in a position of wealth, he was able to get the best doctors to come look at his leg and to see what was going on. So John hired one of the best doctors in the area. They came over, they took a look at his leg, they inspected it, used their tools and their medicine to really see what was going on. And the first doctor came and said, after a meeting with John and inspecting his leg, "I'm sorry, I have no idea what's going on. I can't do anything for your leg." So the doctor left. John didn't like that answer and really wanted to figure out what was wrong because he couldn't walk. The pain was so bad that he had to have crutches fashioned for himself and a walking device similar to a wheelchair if he were to go long distances. He made these things, he fashioned them, had somebody build them for himself so that he could get around. And so the doctor telling John that he can't do anything didn't sit well with John. So John hired another doctor. The second doctor came, looked and inspected John's leg, and looked at the sores and all of the things that they could think of to remedy the leg. And they too left saying, "I'm sorry, I can do nothing for your leg." This same thing happened 4 more times. And John by now thought, surely there must be some doctor somewhere that can help me cure my leg. And so he paid the sum to have one of the best doctors in the nation come and look at his leg. The 7th doctor came, and one of the best doctors in the nation inspected John's leg, looked it over, and told him, "I'm sorry, this is beyond the help of medicine. I could charge you a large fee for the doctor visit, but that would do you no good." Essentially, the doctor was telling him that there's nothing that anyone can do, so you're going to die from this disease. And that's what John felt too. 7 doctors later, he resigned himself that this disease was going to be what would kill him. Because of his leg, John is not able to get up and go around and do things. He would sit a lot of time pondering in his room, thinking about the world, his life, and other people. And at this time, he developed a desire for the welfare of other human beings greater than he had before. And he would use his mind to think of things that he could do to help other people, and he would try and help as many people as he could in his afflicted state, which would mean getting on his crutches or his wheelchair, going out, helping them, serving them, maybe even giving some of them money to do whatever they needed to do. As John was sitting, resting in his bed for a period of about 6 months, he one day heard that in town some preachers were going to come and preach, missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The missionaries that were called were to this area where John was living to preach was Jared Carter and his brother Simeon Carter. Now, unbeknownst to John, Jared Carter was a phenomenal missionary and had once taught a congregation about the truths of the restored gospel that he ended up baptizing about 70 people right there after the sermon was over. A very phenomenal missionary. And so John decided that he wanted to go to where the missionaries were preaching, and he wanted to, thinking of himself as a scholar of the scriptures and of the Bible and of the correct doctrine, he wanted to put them in their place and tell them all of the heresy that they were saying. So John put it in his mind that he's going to go to this meeting. And then he just waited for the meeting. The day of the meeting came. John slowly got himself out of bed, grabbed his walking crutches, and prepared for the day, keeping his leg from dangling and keeping it at as much of a right angle as he could to his body. Then once he was ready, he and some of his sons traveled slowly to the meeting, and John made his way up to the front of the seating area and sat down and propped up his leg on whatever he could so that it's at a right angle and would cause him no pain during this meeting. And he sat and listened. And as John listened with this intent to argue with the preachers, with the missionaries, slowly he noticed a change coming about inside. And as the meeting wore on, he realized that he didn't want to argue with them. In fact, he wanted to have these missionaries come to his house and teach him more. The Spirit worked on John little by little. And at the end of the meeting, he told one of his sons to go and invite the missionaries over to their house because they needed a place to stay for the night and to teach them more about the gospel and the truths they were teaching. So his son went up and invited them to come stay at their house. And they all made their way back to the house, and they sat down together in John's living room. John asking all of the questions that he wanted to ask, and the missionaries responding. Eventually, they heard the clock chime 11 p.m., and they realized it's getting late, people need to go to sleep. The missionaries asked John if he would want to be baptized. So John told them he wanted to be baptized, but that he couldn't. To be baptized in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you have to be over the age of 8 or older, and you have to be willing to take upon you the name of Christ. You have to be willing to mourn with those that mourn, comfort those that stand in need of comfort, and be willing to keep the commandments and follow Jesus Christ. John was willing to do all of that. He was willing to do that. The thing that he couldn't do that made it impossible for him to get baptized without going through excruciating pain was his leg. Because the other requirement for baptism in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that you have to be fully submersed in the water going backwards. Now the person baptizing you helps you so that you go under the water, your whole body, and so that you can get back up without falling and having to swim. And John knew this. However, he also knew that he could not put his leg, because of all the sores and the disease that no doctor could cure, in the water. He told this to the missionaries, and the missionaries, one of them asked him, "Do you not believe that Jesus Christ's church had all power when it was on the earth to cure all manner of diseases?" John said, "Yes, I believe that." And they asked, "Do you not believe that that same power exists today in Jesus Christ's church?" John said he'd never thought of that before. And then the missionaries asked John, "Do you believe that Jesus Christ has the power to heal your leg?" And John said, "Yes." The elders told John that Jesus has said, "Is there any sick among you? Let them call for the elders of the church and let them pray over him." They said, "We are the elders of the church. We hold the priesthood of God, the power delegated to man to act in his name. Would you like us to administer to you?" John said yes, and then Jared Carter rose to his full height and looked John in the eyes and commanded him in the name of Jesus Christ to arise and walk. John, sitting there, he slowly, tenderly got up without his crutches, mostly putting weight on his good leg, and then he slowly lowered his affected leg down to the ground and gingerly put weight on it for the first time in a very long time. Looking down at his leg, he saw that there was no more scars, no more black spots. It was healed. And then, with a small smile and tears, he began to walk in his house, back and forth, back and forth. Something he hadn't been able to do in a long time. John was so excited that he could walk, and he wanted to get baptized right away. So after he had warmed up a little bit, the elders and John and some of his sons went and walked 3/4 of a mile to Lake George, the nearest lake, and John was baptized. And then they walked 3/4 of a mile back to his house, and from then on, John had full use of his leg. It was beyond the cure of medicine, but not beyond the cure of God. From then on, John was a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When the word of wisdom came out and he heard about it, he immediately cut out tobacco, tea, coffee, and he never touched liquor again. John would also prove to be a great asset financially to the church. When the Kirtland Temple was being built, a plot of land was being used for the saints to build the temple on. And unfortunately, because the lack of funds and money that the saints had, the temple loan was defaulting on the land, and thus the land was going to be taken from the church. So one night, Joseph Smith and some of the other members of the presidency of the church were kneeling and praying and asking for the Lord to send someone that could help them with the financial matters in the church to resolve this debt. And then they waited and waited and waited. Meanwhile, in New York, John was preparing to go to sleep one night, and he lay down in his bed after walking into his room and getting ready for bed without the use of his crutch because his leg was healed. He lay down in his bed to sleep, and as he was sleeping, he had a dream or a vision or a revelation, and he needed to go immediately, to take his family immediately and go to Kirtland. And so, the next morning, John got his family up, they packed all the provisions they could, and they left to Kirtland on Christmas Day. Even though his neighbors were grumbling and saying that this was a fruitless cause, John still went. They arrived in Kirtland around January 22nd of the next year, and they met with the prophet. And shortly thereafter, when they arrived, John learned that the very night that Joseph Smith was praying for help with financial matters in curing the default loan was the very night that John had that revelation to move his family to Kirtland. John was able to help so that the loan would not default. He gave Joseph Smith a $2,000 note, and the temple was able to finish being constructed, which John did offer much other financial assistance to. Now, even though he was very well off, John would end up losing all of his money because in Kirtland, the Lord commanded Joseph Smith to set up the Kirtland Bank but for the church. So Joseph Smith set it up. Unfortunately, it would end up failing and losing everyone's money, including John's. All of his money is now gone. So shortly after that, the church moved to Missouri, and on the way to Missouri, they had to beg for bread at people's houses because they had no money. Fortunately, when they arrived, John and his sons were able to rebuild wealth from farming and other things that they were very good at, and they rebuilt a lot of wealth. And the time came for the saints to go to Nauvoo, Illinois. And so John and his family went, and along the way, after they got there, a lot of his livestock was stolen by mobs, so that decreased his value again. But through hard work, determination, and John's character, he rebuilt wealth again and provided much financial assistance to the church in building the Nauvoo temple. One day when John was in Nauvoo, he was called on a mission to the eastern states. So he was walking through town as he was preparing to leave, and he ran into Joseph Smith. And Joseph pulled out that old $2,000 note that John had given him when they were in Kirtland. And he wanted to give it back to John. John said, "No, you can keep it and do whatever you want with it." And Joseph Smith laid his hand heavily on John's shoulder and said, "Bless you, Father Tanner, you and your children shall never beg for bread." And that prophecy was fulfilled. John Tanner eventually, after his mission, moved his family to Salt Lake, and he was able to provide for all of his extended family as they were in much need. And never again did he have to beg for bread. Throughout his life, John Tanner was a great example of faith and courage, and faith to be healed, and faith to rebuild, and faith to trust in God and in Jesus Christ. And this story reminds me that we're never alone, and that God loves us, and that He's always aware of all of the little details in our lives. So that's going to do it, guys. Thanks for listening to today's story. And if you're like me and got something out of it, comment below in the comment section. And if you have a story that you would like to share of a miracle that you know of, or that you've been a part of, or a tender mercy even that you have been a part of, please share in the form below in the comments. Click on the link and I'll share it on this channel. And remember that the next time you go grocery shopping, please pick up the like button and take them grocery shopping with you. Get all your groceries and make sure they get their groceries too, and then pay for their groceries. All right, we'll see you next time. Thank you.